She will be announced at the solstice gathering. Her name is Bryn. Isolde heard the words, the way one hears a door slam in a distant room, the sound traveling through walls and wood and bone, before it fully registers as real. She was standing at the edge of the great hall, a cup of warmed elderflower in her hands, the steam still curling up past her chin, and the cup did not fall. Her fingers did not loosen. She stood very still, and let the sentence move through her a second time, parsing it the way she would parse a wound to determine its depth. She will be announced at the solstice gathering. Her name is Bryn. Fenris had not said it to her. That was the thing that would haunt her longest, in the days and weeks and cold mornings that followed. He had said it to Aldrich, his second, the two of them standing near the carved stone arch that separated the great hall from the war room, their backs to the corridor, where Isolde had paused to retie the lacing of her boot. She had not been hiding. She had not been listening on purpose. She had simply knelt down in a dim corridor to fix a leather strap that had come loose, and the hall's peculiar acoustics had delivered his voice to her, as cleanly as if he had spoken directly into her ear. She will be announced at the solstice gathering. The solstice gathering was 3 weeks away. The wedding cloak was not yet sewn. In fact, the seamstress, old Marin with her silver-threaded needles, had sent word only that morning, asking Isolde to come for the measuring of her shoulders, so that the deep green wool could be cut to the right width at the back seam. Isolde had folded the note into her pocket and thought, with a small, quiet pleasure, that she would go after the midday meal. She had touched the folded paper twice since then, the way one touches a small, private joy. She put the elderflower cup down on a side table. She straightened. She walked out of the corridor, at a pace that was perfectly normal, and she did not look in the direction of the arch, and she did not look at Fenris. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She unfolded Marin's note, and smoothed it on her knee, and read it again, and then she folded it back up, and set it on the pillow beside her, and pressed both hands flat on her thighs, and breathed. The mating bond was not yet sealed. That was something. In their pack, in the old tradition that Fenris kept with a rigidity that sometimes felt like reverence, and sometimes felt like armor, the bond was only fully sealed when the Alpha spoke the formal claim beneath the pack's moon altar, the wedding cloak draped across both shoulders, the words old as the mountain itself. They had been betrothed for 7 months, 7 months of shared meals, of long evenings by the fire in his study, of conversations that ranged from pack law to the migration habits of the red deer, to the particular quality of light in the valley at the end of summer. 7 months of his hand at the small of her back when she walked beside him at gatherings. 7 months of being called his. And she had believed it. That was the part that sat in her chest like a stone, not sharp, not burning, just heavy. She had believed it entirely. She stood up. She was a practical woman. She had been a practical woman since she was 12 years old, and her mother had died, and her father had sat her down at the kitchen table and explained, with the gentle bluntness of a grieving man, that they would have to manage. She had learned to manage. She had learned that feeling a thing completely and acting sensibly were not incompatible, that grief did not have to be performed at volume to be genuine, that the wisest response to most crises was to first take stock of what you actually had. What she had: 1 room in the Alpha's longhouse, a wardrobe of fine clothes that were technically pack property and not hers to take, a silver ring on her right hand that Fenris had given her as a betrothal token, a small leather satchel of her own belongings that would not be difficult to pack, a skill with herbs and poultices that she had spent 4 years developing, and a cousin 3 valleys east who had written to her twice in the past year, saying the door was always open. What she did not have: a completed wedding cloak, a sealed bond, a single witness to what she had heard. The last thing, she realized, was actually the most clarifying. If she confronted him now, tonight, he would say she had misheard, or that it was pack business she didn't understand, or perhaps he would not deny it at all, but would stand very straight and look at her with those gray eyes that she had spent 7 months learning to read, and say something that was technically honest and emotionally devastating. Fenris was many things. He was not a man who lied with words. He was a man who arranged truth so carefully that the space between them became invisible until you fell into it. She had fallen far enough. She packed the leather satchel that evening, quietly, while the longhouse filled with the usual sounds of supper preparation. She did not take the fine clothes. She took her own things, her mother's carved bone comb, a small book of herb lore she had annotated in the margins over years, a spare wool tunic, her warmest stockings, the silver ring which was hers, because he had pressed it into her palm himself and said, in the low voice he kept for things he meant deeply, that it had belonged to no one before her, and would belong to no one after. She thought about leaving it. She decided not to. It was hers. He had said so. She did not leave a note. She thought about it for longer than seemed rational, standing at the small writing desk with a pen in her hand and the blank paper in front of her. She could not find words that did not sound like either accusation or apology, and she was not prepared to offer either. She had done nothing that required an apology, and she did not know enough to accuse. She knew only what she had heard, and what she had heard had been enough. She left in the early dark, before dawn, when the pack's night watch had just rotated, and the new pair were still cold and slow at their posts. She was not, technically, prohibited from leaving. She was not a prisoner. She was a betrothed woman who was leaving before a wedding that was not going to happen. The path through the forest to the eastern road was one she had walked dozens of times. She knew where the roots lifted the soil into ankle traps, and where the low branch came across the path at exactly brow height. She knew the smell of the pines just before the ridge, and the way the wind shifted when you crested it. She walked it in the dark with her satchel over one shoulder, and her heart doing something complicated in her chest that was not quite grief, and not quite anger, and was, if she was honest, closer to a kind of terrible clarity. She had always known, underneath everything, that this was the risk. That a woman who was not born to the pack, who came from the outer settlements with no bloodline ties to the great families, who had no wolf of her own, was always standing on ground that could shift. She had told herself that Fenris was different, that his deliberateness, his stillness, the way he looked at her, as if she were a problem worth the full weight of his attention, she had told herself, these were the signs of a man who had chosen carefully and would not unchoose. She had been building a future on the assumption that his choosing was permanent. She reached the ridge just as the first thin light came up over the eastern peaks. She stopped there, not because she was sentimental about it, but because her legs needed a moment, and the view was something she had loved, and it seemed right to look at it once more. The valley spread below her, the longhouse's smoke just beginning to rise, the pack's fields still winter gray, the river, a dark thread through the bottom. Peaceful, hers once, she had thought. She turned east and walked. 3 valleys and 2 days, and 1 sleepless night later, she arrived at her cousin Petra's door. Petra was a small, sharp-faced woman of 40, who had left the central packlands a decade ago to marry a human craftsman named Joris, and had made, by all accounts, an extremely contented life. She grew medicinal herbs in neat rows behind the cottage. She kept 2 goats whose names changed each year, based on which historical figure had most recently irritated her. She had strong opinions about drying versus steeping, and the correct way to treat a bruise. When she opened the door and saw Isolde standing there with a travel-creased face and a satchel over her shoulder, and the particular tight-around-the-eyes look of a woman who had held herself together for 2 days, she said nothing at all except, "Come in then," and stepped back. Isolde came in. There was tea. There was a bowl of soup that Petra produced, with the efficiency of someone who feeds people as a primary love language. Joris appeared from the workshop in the back, took in the situation with the perceptive silence of a man who had been married to Petra for 10 years, said, "Good to have you," and retreated again. Isolde sat by the fire and ate, and did not talk until the soup was finished. Then she talked. She told Petra everything, not the short version, not the managed version, but the full version, including the parts that embarrassed her, including the note from the seamstress that she had touched twice, including the way she had felt standing at that writing desk, trying to find words that fit. Petra listened with her elbows on her knees, and her small face still, and when Isolde finished, She was quiet for a moment. You didn't wait to hear an explanation, Petra said. It was not a criticism. It was a question, in the shape of a statement. No, Isolde said. Why not? Because, Isolde said, and stopped. She turned the silver ring on her finger, once. Because if I had waited, I would have talked myself into staying. I would have listened to whatever he said, and I would have found a way to make it acceptable. And I have done that before, with other things, and I am tired of being the person who makes things acceptable. Petra nodded slowly. Then you made the right call. Isolde let out a breath that had been packed tight for 2 days. I don't know if it was right, but I know I'm not going back. She was not going back. She settled into Petra's cottage with the practical ease of a woman who had grown up learning to adapt. Within a week, she had taken over the morning herb tending because Petra's hands ached in the cold, and Isolde's did not. Within 2 weeks, she had set up a small consultation space in the back room, and the nearest neighbor had come in with a knee that had been swollen since the autumn, and Isolde had treated it with a warm poultice and a specific compress schedule, and a calm, clear explanation of what was happening inside the joint and what was not. The neighbor told her sister. The sister told the family 2 farms over. Word traveled the way it always does in small places, which is to say quickly and with embellishment. But in this case, the embellishment was flattering. By the end of the first month, Isolde was busy. She had not thought about what she would do about the mating bond, or rather, she had thought about it the way you think about a structural problem in a house. She knew it was there, knew it required attention, had not yet decided what kind of attention. The betrothal bond was partial, not sealed. It was a thread pulled taut between 2 people who had intended something that had not been completed. It sat at the edge of her senses like a sound she couldn't quite place. Present, but not overwhelming. She was aware of it. She chose not to engage with it. What she was less prepared for was the dreams. They started in the 2nd week. Not dramatic dreams. Not the kind that jolt you upright with your heart hammering. Quiet dreams. In them, Fenris was always at a distance, standing at the edge of some large space, the hall, the valley, a field she didn't recognize, and he was not doing anything remarkable. He was just standing there, and in the dream she knew he was looking for something, and in the dream she also knew she was what he was looking for, and in the dream, this made her feel 2 contradictory things simultaneously, wanted and furious. She woke from them feeling rested and irritated, which was not a combination she had previously experienced. She did not write to him. She had not written to anyone at the pack, not Aldrich, not the herbalist she'd apprenticed under for a year when she first arrived, not Marin the seamstress. She had, she thought, been fairly clean about the leaving. The life she'd had in the pack belonged to the pack. She was building something new, and she was building it deliberately, methodically, the way she built most things. She was a person who planted herbs in the right soil at the right time and waited with appropriate patience for them to grow. She knew how to invest in process. She knew that good things rarely arrived immediately and that most disasters came from impatience. She could do this. She would be fine. She was fine. She was standing in the back garden in the pale winter sun, cutting dried stalks of yarrow, when she heard horses on the road. She did not look up immediately. Horses were not unusual. The road ran past Petra's cottage and connected 3 villages, and horses were on it multiple times a day. She finished cutting the yarrow stalk and laid it in the basket and turned to the feverfew, which also wanted cutting, and listened to the horses slow down. She heard Petra's voice at the front of the cottage, the particular tone Petra used when speaking to someone she had not expected and was not entirely pleased to see. She heard another voice. She knew that voice. She had spent 7 months learning the frequency of it, the way it dropped when he was serious, the way it moved when he was asking something he already knew the answer to. She knew it the way you know the sound of weather changing. Before you see it, before you can name exactly what you're hearing, your body knows. She set the basket down. She brushed the dry plant matter from her hands. She stood in the back garden of her cousin's cottage in her working clothes, and her hair in a practical braid, and she thought, with a composed calmness that she was privately proud of, that she had known this moment was coming, and she was ready for it. She walked around to the front of the cottage. There were 3 of them, Fenris, Aldrich, and a younger pack member she recognized, but did not know well. Corvin, she thought, one of the scouts who knew the eastern roads. They had ridden hard. The horse's breath was white in the cold air, though the animals themselves were clearly well rested and untroubled. Fenris was not yet off his horse. He was sitting very still, looking at Petra, and then Petra said something that required a response, and he looked up, and that was when he saw Isolde. He went completely still. She had not expected that. She had expected the gray eyes to be controlled, arranged into the particular expression he wore in public, the slight distance, the authority, the surface that gave very little away. Instead, for just a moment, before the control came back, she saw something that was not controlled at all, something that sat in that space between relief and pain. She looked at it steadily. She did not let it move her. She had seen it, and she had catalogued it, and she would hold it somewhere and think about it later, because right now, she needed to be someone who was standing on her own ground and knew it. Isolde, he said, and even the way he said her name was different out here, outside of the longhouse and the valley and all the places that had been his. It was lower, less certain. Fenris, she said. He dismounted. Aldrich stayed on his horse with the practiced neutrality of a second, who understood when he was not needed. Corvin did the same. Fenris walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance, the distance one kept in formal encounters, not the distance of the 7 months they'd had. She noticed the choice. She did not know what it meant yet. You left without telling me, he said. I did. I need to understand why. She looked at him for a long moment. He had not changed in a month. She had not expected him to. He was the same person she had sat across from at supper for 7 months. The wide, severe jaw, the gray eyes with their habit of going dark when something mattered to him, the particular set of his shoulders that she had learned to read like weather. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept well, which was a small, unwilling satisfaction. I think, she said, that you already understand why. Something moved across his face. What you heard. I heard what I heard, she said. And I heard it clearly. Bryn, announced at the solstice gathering. She kept her voice even. The wedding cloak was not yet sewn. I made a choice. You made a choice without asking me. The same way you made a choice without telling me. Silence. And the horses shifted behind him. Somewhere down the road, a cart was moving, the wooden wheels a low creak in the cold air. May I speak? He said. She considered it. You may speak, she said. I will listen. I won't promise what comes after. He exhaled. Not dramatically. It was a very small exhale, the kind she associated with him working something through. There is a treaty, he said, with Bryn's family. The naming at the solstice. It is not what you think. It is a political announcement. A formality. It was arranged 8 years ago, before I met you, before the betrothal, before any of this. A political announcement, she said. Yes. That involves your name, beside a woman's name, in a formal gathering announcement. He was quiet. Fenris. Her voice was still even. She had worked hard for that evenness, and she was going to keep it. 8 years ago is not the same as now. 8 years ago, you did not have a woman who believed she was to be your mate. When things change, the arrangements that existed before the change require revisiting. Unless, and here she held the pause the way he would have held it, they don't change as thoroughly as one thought. That is not, he stopped. He pressed his thumb against the base of his own ring finger, in the way he did when he was recalibrating. She had learned that gesture too. She knew every one of his gestures. That was the problem, perhaps. She knew him too well to be fooled by his versions of things. What is Bryn to you? She asked. A political ally, a treaty-bound connection, nothing more. Does she know that? The question landed. She saw it land. He did not answer immediately, and the not answering was itself an answer, and she nodded slowly. I see, she said. She understands the treaty terms, he said, but the sentence had a slight defensiveness in it that she had almost never heard from him before. Fenris was not a defensive man. He was a certain one. The defensiveness meant something. And the treaty terms involve her being announced as your mate at the solstice gathering, Isolde said. And you were planning to tell me when, exactly? Another silence. Longer this time. I was managing the political situation, he said. You were managing it, she said. And I was… what? An inconvenience to be managed later? You were never an inconvenience. I am glad to hear it. She reached into the pocket of her working apron and found, by reflex, the small folded note from the seamstress that she had transferred without thinking from her room at the Longhouse to her pack to the pocket of this apron. She had not been able to make herself throw it away. She drew it out and held it in her hand, not unfolding it. Marin asked me for a fitting the morning I left. Did you know that? He looked at the folded paper. Something in his face changed. The cloak, he said. The cloak, she agreed. Green wool. She was going to cut the back seam to the width of my shoulders. She put the note back in her pocket. I thought it was going to be the most beautiful morning of a very good year. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight and temperature. Fenris stood in it without flinching, which she respected even now. He did not look away. He did not offer false reassurances. He stood in the thing he had made, and he let it be what it was. And the only indication of what it cost him was that slight press of his thumb against his ring finger, repeated. I handled it badly, he said. Yes, she said. I should have told you before the announcement was arranged. Yes. I am telling you now. You are, she said. But you are telling me now because I left. Not because you had decided to tell me. And that is a distinction that matters to me, Fenris. It matters a great deal. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. She had loved, among other things, his capacity to receive a difficult truth without deflecting it. Most people deflected. Most people took a truth that was uncomfortable and turned it so that the edges didn't cut them. He had never done that. He had always taken difficult things straight on, looked at them, held them. She had thought that was a quality of character. She now understood it was also, in some circumstances, insufficient. Taking a truth straight on was not the same as acting on it before the damage was done. What would it take, he said, to bring you home? She looked at him. That question presumes that home is where you are. Isn't it? It was, she said. I am not certain anymore. He took a breath, held it, let it go slowly. Then I need you to tell me what I am working with, what it would look like, what I would need to do. You would need to dissolve the treaty arrangement. It is a complex treaty. I am aware, complex things can be undone by people who wish to undo them. There are other considerations. I am sure there are. She clasped her hands together in front of her, a gesture she made when she was being patient. And I am also sure that they are not more important than choosing your mate. You have arranged your life, Fenris, so that politics and pack law are always the most pressing thing. I have watched you do it for 7 months. I understood it. I respected it. I thought that the betrothal meant I existed outside of that calculus, that there was one thing you had chosen that was not for the pack, not for alliances, not for treaty, something that was yours and mine. But I was in the calculus all along, wasn't I? Weighed against treaties and political allies and what was convenient. That is not how I see you. How do you see me? The pause before he answered was not, she thought, because he didn't know. It was because the knowing was large and difficult to compress into words, and Fenris had always been better with actions than declarations. She had always known that, and had mostly loved it. Right now it was its own kind of frustration. I see you, he said, finally, carefully, as the only person in 7 years who has made me feel that all of this, a small gesture that seemed to encompass everything, the pack, the politics, the long weight of leading, is worth carrying. The words were quiet, and they were simple, and they hit her with a force that was disproportionate to their volume. She kept her face still. She had not traveled 2 days and built a new life in 3 weeks, to be undone by a well-constructed sentence. Then act like it, she said. She turned and went back inside. Petra met her at the door with the expression of a woman who had heard most of that, and was working very hard to respect the autonomy of the people she loved. She handed Isolde a cup of tea. Isolde accepted it without comment, and went to sit by the fire, and outside she could hear the low murmur of Fenris and Aldrich talking, and then the sound of the horses, and then the sound of the road. She waited to hear them leave. They did not leave. After a half-hour, Petra appeared in the doorway. He is asking if he may stay in the village for the night. The inn. He may stay wherever he chooses, Isolde said. Petra's expression communicated several things efficiently, as her expressions tended to do. He's asking if you'll see him tomorrow. Isolde looked into her tea. The fire popped. Outside, the afternoon was going blue and cold, the short winter light already thinking about giving up. She thought about Bryn, about whom she knew nothing except a name said in a corridor. She thought about the treaty, which she did not know the terms of. She thought about Fenris, standing in the garden, pressing his thumb against his ring finger. "Tell him," she said, "that I will see him when he has something to say that he has not already said." It was 2 days before he came back. She was in the consultation room when Corvin came to the door and left a folded note with Petra. She did not open it until the knee patient had been seen, and another woman had been seen, for a recurring headache that turned out to be linked to something she was eating, and the basket of dried yarrow had been finished and hung. Then she opened it. It was not long. Fenris was not a man who wrote long letters. He wrote, "I have sent word to Bryn's family that the political arrangement requires renegotiation. Aldrich is handling the diplomatic language. I have explained that circumstances have changed. I am aware that this is the beginning of an action, not the completion of one, and that you require the completion, not the gesture. I wanted you to know where the beginning was." She read it twice. Then she took out a new sheet and wrote, "I know that cost something. I am not unmoved by it." She did not write anything else. She folded it and asked Petra to send it with Corvin, who was apparently still in the village. She had seen him twice at the market, with the particular patience of a man who was waiting because he had been told to. The next day, Fenris came. They walked. It was her suggestion. She did not want to have this conversation inside a small room. The path that ran north of the village followed a stream that was half frozen, the edges laced with ice, and the center still running dark and quick. She walked on the stream side, and he walked beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence was different from the silence in the garden 2 days ago. It was less defended. It was two people who knew each other well, walking beside each other, trying to find the way back in. "Tell me about the treaty," she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. It was, as he had said, complex. It was not merely a social arrangement, but a set of agreements between his pack and Bryn's family's pack to the north. Agreements about hunting territories and winter supply lines, and the occasional pooling of skilled labor when large structures needed building. Real, practical agreements that had real, practical value. Bryn had been named in them 8 years ago as a means of securing the family's commitment. It was the way it had been done then. It was an arrangement that had existed long enough to have weight. It was never a certainty, he said. When you and I told myself there was time to renegotiate, that I would find a way. You told yourself, she said, but not me. No, not you. Why? He was quiet for several steps. The stream ran beside them. A kingfisher, improbably vivid in the gray winter air, shot across the water at eye height and vanished. She watched it go. "Because," he said, "telling you meant making it real, and making it real meant you would have to decide what you were willing to accept, and I was not certain I could bear what you might decide." She stopped walking. He stopped a half step after she did, and turned to face her. The winter light was flat and honest, and it showed everything: the shadows under his eyes, the slight set of his jaw, the gray of his eyes, which were doing what they did when something mattered, going darker, more concentrated. "You were afraid," she said. "Yes. Of losing me." "Yes. So to avoid losing me," she said slowly, You made choices that guaranteed losing me. You kept a secret to hold on to me, and the secret drove me away. He held her gaze. He did not argue with the logic of it, because the logic was sound. Yes, he said, for the third time. That is what I did. She looked at him for a long moment. A month ago, she could not have had this conversation without the emotion of it overtaking the clarity of it. She understood now, standing by the half-frozen stream in the pale winter light, that leaving had been the right thing, not because it was the ending, but because it had created the space in which the truth could finally be said. Back in the longhouse, in the daily architecture of pack life and politics and the 100 small pressures of being an alpha's intended, this conversation might never have happened. He would have managed and she would have accommodated, and the thing between them would have remained as real and as blocked as water behind a dam. I need you to understand, she said, that I am not easily replaced. Something shifted in his face. Something moved through the gray eyes that she recognized, after a moment, as pain. That is not... He stopped, started again. I never thought of you that way. I know, she said. I know you didn't think of it as replacement, but that is the effect of the choice. You had Bryn named in the treaty. You had me measuring for a wedding cloak. If I had not heard what I heard, I would have walked into the solstice gathering, believing I was your mate, and found a different story being told. What would that have been, Fenris? What would you have said? He did not answer immediately. He looked at the stream. She watched his profile. I don't know, he said finally. And the honesty of it, the clean, awful honesty of it, was the most intimate thing he had offered her in months. I don't know what I would have said. I know it would have been wrong. I know it would have hurt you. I know I had been telling myself that the renegotiation would happen before the gathering, and that you would never have to know, and that was a story I was telling myself, because it was easier than this. Than this. Then standing here, and asking you to come home, knowing that I may have made it impossible. The stream ran. The kingfisher did not return. A crow settled in the bare branches of a tree above them, and made its pragmatic, unimpressed sound. She said, Do you want to know what I am afraid of? Yes, he said. Tell me. I am afraid, she said, of going back and finding that nothing has actually changed, that the treaty renegotiation stalls for political reasons, that there is another Bryn, another arrangement, another thing being managed, that I am the last to know. I am afraid of being a woman who loves someone very much, and is always, always, outside the room where the real decisions are made. She paused. I can love you, and still not be able to live that way. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What would it look like, if nothing was being managed, if you were inside the room? I would need to know things when they happen, not when you have decided they are safe to tell me. I would need to be, I don't want a political role, I have no interest in pack governance, but I would need to be your partner in it, Fenris, not the woman you come home to, who does not know what you have been doing. I need you to talk to me. He considered that. She could see him considering it, not performatively, not for her benefit, but actually turning it over and examining what it would require. I can do that, he said. It does not come naturally to me. I know it doesn't. But I can do it. I want to do it. Want to do it, and doing it are different. Yes, he said, they are. But I would be doing it for you, which means the wanting is the same as the doing. He held her gaze. I don't want anyone else. I want to be very clear about that. There is no version of this where Bryn or anyone like her is what I am building toward. She is not a person to me, in the way that you are a person to me. That is not a complaint about her. It is a fact about you. The thing that had been living in her chest for a month shifted slightly. Not dissolved, not resolved, just shifted, the way something heavy shifts when you adjust how you're carrying it. I need time, she said. I know. I need more than 2 days. I will wait as long as you need. I will stay in the village. I will not press you. She looked at him one more time, at the severity of his jaw, and the darkness of his eyes, and the slight press of his thumb that had started again at some point in the last few minutes. The gesture she knew better than she knew almost anything. She looked at the man she had spent 7 months learning and said, inside herself, quietly and honestly, that she was not done. She was hurt, and she was careful, and she was not going back without conditions, and proof, and a different arrangement than the one that had brought her here, but she was not done. She turned back toward the village. He walked beside her. They did not speak again until they reached Petra's gate, and then he said her name, just her name, in the low voice he kept for things he meant, and she said, "Good night, Fenris," and went inside. He stayed in the village. A week passed, then another. He was not pressing her, as he had promised, but his presence was unavoidable in the practical sense. The village was small, and she could see the inn from the back garden when she was tending the herbs, and she knew, without looking directly, that he was there. He was not idle. She learned from Petra, who learned from the innkeeper, that he was working. He had set up a kind of mobile communication with Aldrich, who was at the pack with full authority to manage the day-to-day, and Fenris was handling the treaty renegotiation correspondence from the village, writing letters and receiving them with a focused regularity that Corvin was running back and forth to the pack to facilitate. He was dissolving the old arrangement. He was doing it carefully, because he was a careful man, and because rushing it would fracture something that had real practical value. But he was doing it. She knew this, because on the 5th day of the 2nd week, he left a letter at Petra's door. Not a petition, not a persuasion, just an update. 2 paragraphs. Bryn's family had responded. The hunting territory terms were being rewritten into a separate, clean agreement that required no naming of persons. The winter supply line arrangement was being restructured similarly. The family was not happy, but they were pragmatic, and pragmatic people, when dealt with honestly, generally found a way forward. She read the letter by the fire, and was quiet for a moment, and then she said to Petra, "I think I would like to have supper with him tonight, if you'll help me manage the timing." Petra said, "I thought you'd get there around now," which was the most Petra had said about the situation in 3 weeks, which was characteristic, and which Isolde appreciated deeply. Supper was at the inn. It was plain food. The innkeeper was good at hearty, and not interested in fancy, and they sat at a table by the window, with the dark pressing up against the glass, and the fire at their backs, and for the first part of the meal, they talked about practical things, the treaty, the herb garden, what Joris was building in the back workshop. It was the easiest conversation they had managed since she'd left, which she thought was because the hard conversations had already happened, and this was the space that opened up after them. Toward the end of the meal, he said, "There is something I want to tell you, about why I chose you." She picked up her cup. "All right," she said. "I chose you," he said, "not because you were available, or appropriate, or politically convenient. I chose you, because the first time you looked at me, you did not look at me as an alpha, you looked at me as a person who was slightly wrong about something." He paused. "I had been wrong about the treatment of a particular route for a respiratory complaint, and you corrected me with complete confidence, and no apology. And you were right, and I was right that you were right, and I thought, this is a person who sees things clearly. I wanted that close to me. I wanted it permanently." She thought about that evening. She remembered it differently, of course. She had not known who he was when she corrected him, had simply been in the healer's room at a pack gathering, as a visiting practitioner, and had been listening to an alpha she hadn't met explain something incorrectly to a patient. She had opened her mouth before she thought about it. She remembered the moment she had realized who he was, the slight freezing of her face, and she remembered that he had looked at her, after her correction, with something that was not irritation, and not authority, but something she could not quite classify. Now she could classify it. Now she knew what he had looked like in that moment. "You never told me that," she said. "No, I should have. You should have told me a great many things. I am aware." His eyes were doing the thing. "I intend to do better at that." She looked at him across the table, at the plain supper and the firelight, and the window with the winter night outside, and she felt the full weight of the month. The leaving, the cold walk, the cousin's cottage, the new work, the building of something that was genuinely hers, the dreams she was still having, in which he stood at the edge of a field, looking for her. She felt all of it, and she felt also the thread of the unfinished bond, the thing that sat at the edge of her senses and had been there since the beginning, the thing that was not sealed, but that had always been real. "I am not ready to come back," she said. "Not yet." He absorbed that with the straight-on quality she had always respected. "But I am not telling you to leave," she added. Something shifted in his expression. "I understand the distinction," he said. "I need to know that I have something of my own here," she said. "That when I come back, if I come back, I am not returning to the life I left. I need to come back to something different. I need the room to be bigger, Fenris. I need to be in it. I will expand it," he said, without hesitation. "Tell me what it looks like, and I will make it so." "It doesn't work if I have to tell you. You have to see it yourself." He considered that. She watched him consider it. "Fair," he said, finally. "Then I'll work on seeing." She stayed in the village. He stayed in the village. They had supper twice more over the following week, and on the second occasion, she found herself laughing at something he said, a dry observation about Aldrich's diplomatic language being so careful, it had probably confused the recipient entirely, and the laugh was real and unforced, and when it was done, she felt the strange grace of it, the fact that she could still laugh with him despite everything. The following morning, Petra's neighbor came by, not the knee patient, but a different one, a woman in her late 40s named Sefa, who had not been seen before, but who had heard, apparently, about the herb practitioner at Petra's cottage. She had a young girl with her, 7 or 8, with a neat braid and worn-down boot tips, who sat very quietly on the chair outside the consultation room and waited with the patience of a child accustomed to accompanying adults to difficult places. Sefa had a persistent cough and a general gray quality to her energy that Isolde diagnosed, over 20 careful minutes, as the aftermath of a respiratory illness that had not been fully resolved. She put together a specific treatment, a steeping tea with particular herbs, a compress for the chest, a specific schedule of rest and gentle movement, and she explained each element clearly and answered every question Sefa had, and when Sefa's eyes filled for a moment, she did not comment on it, but simply continued speaking in the calm, clear voice she used when she wanted to make a person feel that their body was not a betrayal, but a system that could be worked with. When Sefa left, the little girl jumped up from her chair and took her mother's hand, and Isolde watched them go down the path toward the road and felt something settle in her chest that was warm and without ambivalence. This was what she had been building. This was the thing she had not known she was missing until she had it. She went to find Fenris. He was in the inn's small parlor with Corvin and a spread of correspondence, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She came in and sat across from him and looked at the letters on the table between them. "How is it going?" she said. He showed her. Not the summary, not the managed version. He pushed the relevant papers across the table and explained the actual situation, the sticking points, and the progress, and what he thought the timeline looked like. She asked questions, and he answered them, and they worked through the problem together, the way two practical people work through a problem. And at some point, Corvin quietly gathered his own papers and found somewhere else to be, and they did not notice him leave. An hour later, she said, "May I ask you something?" "Yes. What is your plan if Bryn's family escalates?" "I have 3 options," he said, and laid them out. She listened, and then said, "There is a 4th," and he listened, and then said she was right, and made a note. She looked at his handwriting on the paper, familiar from 7 months of notes and letters, and the particular way he formed his letters with a slight forward lean, and she looked at the papers between them on the table, and at his hands with the ink on the edge of his 3rd finger from the quill, and she thought, This is what it should look like. This is what I asked for." She said, "I want to come home." He looked up. "Not yet," she said. "Not until the treaty is finished and the new terms are settled. I want to see it done, not promised." "That is reasonable," he said. "And when I come home," she said, "I want the room in the longhouse that faces east, not the one I had." Something in his expression, that slight shift, Why that room? Because I want to see the morning from the beginning, she said. And because it is larger, and I want to set up a proper consultation space in the half of it that doesn't have the window. I want to continue doing this work. The pack needs a healer with this kind of knowledge, and I want to be that person, not as something adjacent to being your mate, as something I am in my own right. Yes, he said simply. And I want you to talk to me, she said, when things are happening, even when, especially when, you are not sure how I will respond. I need that, Fenris. I know, he said. I know you do, and I want to give it to you. I have been practicing it, actually, these last weeks. I have been writing down the things I would have previously simply managed and not mentioned, so that when you are there I have the habit already. She stared at him. You have been keeping a list. Yes. Of things to tell me. Yes. She did not know whether to be charmed or exasperated or both. She settled on both. That is a very Fenris approach to emotional openness, she said. I am aware, he said, but I mean it seriously. I want to build the habit. The list is how I build habits. She looked at him across the table, littered with papers and ink, and the complicated real work of a life that was his, that she had been invited into, that she had walked away from, and that she was now, carefully and conditionally, and with both eyes open, walking back toward. She looked at him and she thought, I know this person. I know him well enough to know that the list is genuine and not performance. I know that the cost of what he did was real, and that the cost of what he is doing now is also real. I know that he is not a man who performs. I know that when he says he will do something, he does it. I know all of this. I know all of this, and I love him, and that is the most vulnerable position I have ever occupied, and I am going to occupy it anyway. Show me the list, she said. He reached into the inside breast of his jacket and produced a folded paper. He held it out. She took it and unfolded it. The handwriting was the familiar forward lean, slightly compressed, as it always was when he was being precise. There were 8 items. They ranged from the specific. There is a debt between the pack and the Northern River settlement that I have been managing alone that will require resolution in the spring. You should know the terms. To the strangely intimate, I have not been sleeping well. I didn't want to tell you, because it would have felt like an appeal to sympathy, and I did not want your sympathy. I wanted you to come back because you chose to, but I am telling you now. She read all 8 items. She folded the paper and held it. The fire popped. Outside, the winter light was doing its brief, brilliant thing, just before giving up for the day. The debt with the Northern River settlement, she said. What are the terms? He told her. She stayed 2 more weeks. She needed that time not for doubt. She had made her decision at the table with the papers between them, but to complete what she had started. Sepha came back twice, and her color had improved, and Isolde adjusted the treatment slightly for the second phase. The knee patient came for a final check, and the joint was significantly better. 2 new people came, referred by previous patients, and she saw them, and began courses of treatment. She wrote careful notes for each case, in the back of her herb book, in the annotated margins, using the shorthand she had developed. On the second to last day, she packed her satchel again. It was heavier this time. Petra had been quietly adding to it. Her own cuts of dried herbs from the garden, a small packet of seeds for the varieties that Isolde had been most interested in, the little pot of salve Petra made for cold cracked hands. They stood at the door, and Petra held her, and she held Petra back, and neither of them were particularly inclined toward long emotional farewells, but this was different, and they both knew it. You can always come back, Petra said. I know, Isolde said. That is not nothing. Joris will miss you. Joris will miss having someone to show his woodworking to, without having to explain why the joints matter. That is true, Petra said. He and Corvin have apparently been having a very satisfying time. Isolde laughed. Petra let her go. She walked out to where Fenris was waiting with the horses. She looked at the eastern path she had arrived on, 40-some days ago, with a satchel on her shoulder and a tight place around her eyes, and she looked at the road they would take back west. and she thought about the valley and the longhouse and the morning view from the east-facing room. "Ready?" Fenris said. She settled her satchel. "Ready," she said. They rode. Aldrich and Corvin were a discreet distance behind. The road west through the valleys was longer than the walking path she had come by, and in most places, wide enough for 2 horses side by side, and they rode that way for most of the day, side by side, the horses moving in companionable sync, the winter landscape rolling past them, the pale sun tracking its low arc overhead. They talked sometimes, and were quiet sometimes, and both were natural. Toward the middle of the afternoon, when the first real cold of the day came down from the north, Fenris said, "I should tell you, the treaty renegotiation reached its final agreement this morning. Aldrich sent word. The terms are settled, no person named in them, clean agreements." She felt the thing in her chest move again, differently this time, not the stone-heavy thing from the corridor, but something that had space in it. How did Bryn's family receive it ultimately? "With less difficulty than expected," he said. "Her father was, I think, relieved. He had his own concerns about the arrangement. It had become a political burden for him, as much as for me." A pause. "I should have addressed it years ago." "You were afraid," she said. "Yes. You address things when you are not afraid, and you manage them in the dark when you are. That is a pattern." "Yes." He looked at her. "I am working on it." "I know," she said. "So am I. What are you afraid of?" She considered the question. The horses walked. The road wound through a stand of bare-branched trees, the sky a cold, brilliant blue above them. "I am afraid," she said, "of becoming a woman who disappeared into someone else's life, of looking up in 10 years and finding that the person I was before, the person who corrected an alpha in a healer's room without a second thought, has been smoothed down by accommodation. I have a tendency to accommodate, Fenris. It is not the same as being compliant. I know the difference and you know the difference, but it is real. I accommodate because I love well, and I want the people I love to be comfortable, and sometimes those 2 things pull in the same direction, and sometimes they don't. And you need me not to let you disappear," he said. "I need to not let myself disappear," she said. "But yes, I need you to see me clearly enough to notice if it's happening." "I see you very clearly," he said. "I know," she said. "It is one of the things I love about you. When you look at me, I feel seen in a way that is not comfortable." "Exactly, but that is true. You see the parts I am not performing. That matters to me." They rode in comfortable silence for a time. Then he said, "The east-facing room has been cleared. I had it seen to last week." She looked at him. He was looking ahead at the road, the severe jaw in profile. "Last week. I wanted it to be ready. Before I confirmed I was coming back." "Yes." A slight pause. "I was confident." "You were presumptuous," she said. "I was both," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way she had missed. The presumption was informed by confidence. She shook her head, but the warmth of it was in her chest, spreading. He had cleared the room. He had been waiting for her, in the practical way that was his, making the space ready, making the thing real, before the words confirmed it. They arrived at the longhouse as evening came on. The pack's fires were already lit, warm squares of light in the windows, smoke rising from the kitchens. Several pack members were in the yard as they came through the gate, and there was a moment of stillness as people registered who was arriving, and then a cautious but genuine welcome, a nod here, a hand raised there, someone's child waving from a doorway before being called in for supper. Nothing dramatic, just the texture of being known, of being a place's person, of having a particular kind of belonging. Marin the seamstress appeared at the edge of the yard. She looked at Isolde with her sharp, careful eyes, and then she looked at Fenris, and then she looked at Isolde again, and said, with the plainness of a woman who had been making wedding cloaks for 40 years, "I'll need to take the measurements again. The wool has been kept." Isolde felt the smile before she consciously chose to make it. "I'll come in the morning," she said. Marin nodded and went inside. Fenris walked beside her through the longhouse to the east-facing room. He opened the door and stepped back. She went in. It was large. She had not registered how large from the outside. The window was wide and faced east, as promised, and in the growing dark, she could see the shapes of the peaks above the valley, the ones that would catch the first light in the morning. The room had been cleared and cleaned, and given a new frame bed, and there was space, real space, generous space, along the north wall where she would put the consultation table and the herb shelves. She set her satchel down on the bed. She looked at the window. She turned around. Fenris was standing in the doorway. "You are not coming in, unless I invite you," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to be clear about that boundary." "It is clear," he said. "I respect it." She looked at him standing in the doorway, the firelight from the corridor behind him, the gray eyes with their particular quality of attention. She thought about the treaty. She thought about the list. She thought about the riding side by side through the long winter afternoon. She thought about the room he had cleared last week, before she confirmed she was coming. "Come in," she said. He came in. He stopped a few feet inside the door, not pressing, not presuming further. She crossed to stand in front of him. She was not a small woman, but he was considerably larger, and being close to him had always had a specific quality. She felt the field of him before the touch, the warmth and the particular gravity that was part wolf and part Fenris, and entirely its own thing. "I need to say something," she said. "Say it?" "I am here by choice," she said, "not because the bond drew me back, not because I had nowhere else to go, not because you came after me and I was flattered. I am here because I looked at the evidence available and made a decision." She held his gaze. "And the decision is that you are worth the risk. You, specifically. The real version of you. The one who keeps a list, and clears a room a week early, and does not flinch from difficult truths, even when they cost him. That version. Not an idealized version. Not the alpha I thought I was getting 7 months ago. The actual man." His eyes were very dark. The press of his thumb had stopped. "The actual man," he said quietly, "is grateful you can see him." "I have always been able to see him," she said. "The question was whether he could see me." "He can," Fenris said. "He does. He is not going to stop." She reached up and touched the side of his face, just her hand against his jaw, the same gesture she had made 100 times over the last 7 months, familiar as a stone she'd carried, warm as a fire she hadn't known she'd missed. He closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. His hand came up and covered hers, not pulling, just present, there, certain. Outside, the pack's evening was moving through its rhythms. Someone was laughing in the kitchen. Somewhere in the yard, the great gray wolf, that was the pack's oldest sentinel, moved in a slow, dignified circle, and settled at the gate with the untroubled authority of an animal that has never known danger, only purpose. The mountains held their snow, the river ran. The east-facing window held the last shred of cold blue sky before the dark came fully on. She said, "Marin will have a green cloak ready by solstice." "Yes," he said, "a different solstice than the one she originally planned for." "A better one," he said. "We don't know that yet." "I know it," he said, not with the certainty of a man who was performing confidence, with the certainty of a man who had made a reckoning and come through it, and was standing on the other side of it, with both feet on the ground and both eyes open. She heard the difference. She had always heard the difference. "Tell me one thing from the list," she said. He thought about it. "There is a pack member, Corvin, you know him now, who has been carrying a grief for 2 years that he has not spoken about to anyone. I have been watching it, and not knowing how to address it. I think," he said, "that he needs the kind of conversation that does not come from an alpha. He needs a healer. I was wondering if, when you were settled, you might be willing to—" "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "That's the answer. Yes, of course I will. That's what the consultation room is for." She lowered her hand from his face. His hand lowered with hers, and then released her fingers gently, and she felt the warmth of it in her palm after. "That is what it means to be in the room. You see something that needs doing. You tell me. I see how I can help. We address it together, instead of you carrying it alone, until it becomes a problem that is too heavy to mention. Yes, he said, that is what it means. We will practice, she said. We will, he said. We are already better at it than we were. We are, she agreed. They stood there in the east-facing room of the longhouse, with the dark coming in through the window and the warmth of the fire in the corridor behind them, and the whole changed, still-forming shape of a different future between them. Not the future she had folded into a seamstress's note and put in her pocket with private joy. A different one, harder one, more honest, less assumption in it, more intention, less convenience, more deliberate choosing, more real, she thought, much more real. In the morning, the light came through the east window before anything else was awake, and she lay in the frame bed with the gray pink of early dawn on the ceiling, and she thought about what she had built in the last 40-some days, and what she was building now, and the difference between things that happen to you and things you make. She thought about Petra's garden and the knee patient, and Sepha and her daughter with the neat braid. She thought about the list in the breast of Fenris's jacket, and the room cleared a week early, and the words he had said in the inn, I don't want anyone else. She thought about the seamstress and the green wool, kept these weeks, waiting. She got up. She dressed. She looked out the east window at the peaks catching the first light, gold coming up over the snow line, the valley still dark below, but already shifting. She stood there for several minutes and let herself feel the full weight of where she was, not where she had been, not where she'd ended up by accident, but where she had walked herself, step by deliberate step, into a choice that was completely her own. Then she went to find Marin. There was a cloak to fit. The seamstress's workroom was at the longhouse's south end, and it smelled of wool and beeswax, and the dried lavender that Marin kept in bunches along the high shelf to discourage moths. The old woman was already at her work table when Isolde arrived, the green wool laid out in neat folds, the silver-threaded needles in their worn leather case. She looked at Isolde when she came in, and said nothing for a moment, just looked, with the assessing, unsentimental gaze of a woman who had been seeing people clearly since before Isolde was born. You look different, Marin said. I've been away for a month, Isolde said. Not that kind of different. The old seamstress unfolded her measuring cord. Stand here. Isolde stood. Marin measured her shoulders, and her back, and the length from nape to mid-thigh where the cloak would fall. She measured twice, the way she always did, because it was the kind of work where precision mattered, and there was no shame in checking. Isolde stood still, and let herself be measured, and thought about the precision of it, the care taken to fit something to a specific person, to account for the particular width of these shoulders, and no others, the specific length of this back. Same measurements as before, Marin said, almost to herself. Good, no changes. She began folding the wool back into working shape. The back seam will be cut tomorrow, 3 weeks to solstice. Will that be enough time? It will be enough time, Marin said firmly, in the tone of a woman who has never in her life run short of time on a cloak. It is my job. Yours is to be here when it's finished. A sideways look. Will you be here? Isolde met the old woman's gaze. The needles gleamed on their shelf. The wool was the color of the valley in late summer, deep and good. I will be here, she said. And that was, she thought, the most precise thing she had said in weeks. Not I intend to be, not I plan to be, not I hope to be. I will be here, the future tense with all its uncertainty, made into something as close to certain as a person can make a thing. She would be here for the cloak, and for the cold mornings, and for the consultation room with the east light coming in. She would be here for Corvin's grief, and Aldrich's careful diplomacy, and the long evenings by the fire, where real conversations happened. She would be here for the version of this life that was honest and open, and larger than the one she had left, the one with the room in it that had her name on the door. She would be here for Fenris, the actual man with the list in his pocket, and the cleared room, and the gray eyes that saw her without flinching. She would be here for that, because she had chosen it with both eyes open, and because choosing something with both eyes open was the only kind of choosing she had ever been able to do with her whole heart. Outside, the valley was fully morning now. The sentinel wolf was at the gate in the first proper sunlight, his thick gray coat bright, his bearing absolute. The mountains stood in their snow, the river ran. The cloak would be green, and it would be ready by solstice, and the back seam would be cut to the width of her shoulders. She walked back through the longhouse, toward the east-facing room, toward the work she had to do, toward the life she was building. She was not replaced. She had never been replaceable. She knew that now the way she knew the path through the forest in the dark, not because she had been told, but because she had walked it herself and found the ground solid under her feet. She was Isolde. She was here. She had chosen this. And it was enough. And it was hers. And it was good.